Hello and welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to show you how to do the segmented soccer ball. It consists of 20 hexagons and 12 pentagons. In order to cut all these pieces and have them all the same, we're going to need patterns like these. In order to produce the patterns, there are many different ways that you can draw these and maybe cut to a line and sand, but they didn't seem to be as precise as the method I'm going to show you. Now, don't worry if you don't have an indexing wheel. I'm going to have patterns available for people who want to try and build this. I have an index wheel with 120 holes in this ring. Divide 120 by 5, you get 24. And I've marked the positions with the tape. So we're going to put pins in each of those locations. I've got a piece of MDF here, 1/2 inch MDF, glued double stick tape to the center. Now I've made a little fence, and it's about 2 1/4 inches, a little over 2 1/4. The main thing is that these two sides are parallel. This is 1/2 inch thick, the same as the MDF. Now we're going to register the fence against 2 of the pins. And we're going to draw the line on our piece of MDF. Move around, draw a line, and continue on. Now we're going to measure that line from point to point. And we come up with 2 3/8 inches. We're going to subtract an inch, we're going to subtract 1/8 of an inch from that. Then you're going to take a piece of hardwood or whatever, it doesn't matter, just as long as it's nice and straight. This is about 3/8 by 1/2. Dimensions aren't critical. We're going to cut little pieces like this that are 2 1/4 inches. That's 1/8 of an inch less than this line. And we're going to use these to form a pentagon on top of the MDF. We're going to use the fence again. We're going to butt the fence up there. We're going to center the piece on the MDF between the 2 points. And we're going to use hot glue to hold it in place. This is going to create a fence for our pattern sawing. Pattern sawing is the method we're going to use to create all of these segments. So once that sets up a couple of seconds, we're going to move Okay, so it doesn't matter if they don't come, the points don't come together. I'm just reinforcing the pieces so that they'll stay where we put them. By doing it this way, we're not going to have to try and sand to a line or freehand cut to a line. We're going to have a fence that will produce a hopefully precise pentagon. Now you can use the same method and the same ring to produce the hexagon. Instead of every 24 spaces, you use every 20, and that gives you 6. Once this is dry or cured or whatever, we're going to take it over to the saw. So we're going to be doing a lot of sawing of angles, and if you're going to use maple like I do, you know maple tends to burn when you saw it. So I highly recommend that you install a nice new blade before you begin all your cutting. The saw blade I use all the time is a 7 1/4 40 tooth blade from Diablo. You can get them at Home Depot, and they're only about $15, $16. I use it all the time in my saw. Just make sure to take off the stupid label on the back. This is an L fence. We're going to use this to do our pattern sawing. It's nothing more than 2 boards screwed together to 90 degrees. This leg is 2 inches. This leg comes out to be 3 5/8. The dimensions aren't critical. Whatever works. You just need enough space underneath to have space for the cutoffs. In order to set it up for this first cut, we're going to take pieces of the material that are the same thickness as the MDF, the 1/2 inch MDF. And then we're going to add 1/8 inch shims on top of it. Place the L fence on top of the materials, and then we're going to clamp it to the fence. The L fence was introduced by Bob Van Dyke, fine woodworking. He came up with this thing, and it has a lot of uses. Remove your shims. Now we're going to set the blade height so that we just come through the MDF, just a hair over 1/2 inch, maybe a 1/16, not much, just enough to clear. Now we're going to look at the pentagon on the piece, and we see it doesn't quite reach to the edges. So we want to maximize our pattern. So we're going to set the fence. See, this is our smallest one. So we're going to set the fence just a little bit over this way from the blade. And this will give us a little bit bigger piece. Now, if we don't quite get all 5 corners on our pattern, we can always move it the other way. Lock your fence down. And I'm going to talk about this before I actually do it. We're going to butt the pentagon up against the fence. We're going to saw it, rotate, saw, get all 5, and then we're going to check to see that we have all 5 points. So we got lucky. We have all 5 points on our pentagon. So we can take off pry off the fence, and we'll have our pattern piece. Once you have that and you have your 2 patterns, then we're going to make the patterns usable for sawing the segments. All right, so what I've done here is I've found the center of the 2 patterns, and I've used a countersink bit to create a divot. You don't have to go all the way through. The pentagon one is 4 1/8 from this base to the tip, all the way around. And the hexagon is 3 5/8 from side to side. We're going to need to be able to hold the segment pieces. So the screws are to hold the pieces in place while you saw them. I set a marking gauge for 1 1/16 on the pentagon, and I've made a smaller pentagon on the pattern, and I drilled 3 holes at the corners and installed some screws. The screws only project about a 32nd of an inch. That's all you need to hold the pieces while they get sawed. Because it's a little bit different shape, I only came in 7/8 of an inch. The idea is to hold it out, the segment out as far as possible without cutting into the screws when you're sawing. So I'll show you how these work. We're going to have to change the setup on the saw. Okay, so I've moved my fence to the other side of the blade because my saw tilts in this direction. We're going to set up to use this L fence again, this time with the segments. So in order to do the setup for the saw this time, we need to use material that is the same thickness as the blanks. So again, this is the same thickness that we're going to be cutting for the maple and walnut. Add the shims, add your fence, we're going to start with the hexagon. The pieces need to be cut at an angle. That's 21 degrees. So we're going to set the saw for 21 degrees. And we're going to bring the fence over. And we're going to take, remember to remove the shims. We're going to raise the blade until it's about a 1/16 of an inch or so above the piece of work. But you want to make sure that the fence doesn't hit the fence. We're going to start with some scrap wood. You want to cut 5 pieces and check the angles before you move on to your good stock. The blanks for the segments are 2 3/8 wide by 3 1/8 inch long. Center the blank on the bottom of the pattern. Press it. We're going to try and get as big a segment as we can, so we're going to sneak up on the cut. Bring the fence over so that's about 1/4 of an inch away from the blade. About a 1/4 of an inch gap here. Lock it down. And we're going to use, because the blade is exposed, we're going to use some push sticks to move the pattern past the piece past the blade. I've got a push stick that goes in the center here to keep it pushed down. And then I've got another piece to push it up against the fence. This piece is high enough that it's over top of the segment, but yet still hits the pattern. When you're cutting, you want to go slow. You don't want to go super fast. You want a nice clean cut. You can go over it twice if you think you've come away from the fence a little bit. Okay, you can see that I've built up little cutoffs in the back here, which is a little dangerous. They could get caught between the saw and the blade and kick back. We're going to address that in a minute. Let's take a look at our segment. We didn't cut close enough. We still have flats around. So what we're going to do is move the fence away from the blade in small increments until we cut and get a segment on the bottom that's a true hexagon. So you can see now that we've got a hexagon. What happens when you're cutting is that this portion of the pattern still holds on to the cutoff. We're going to take a knife and we're going to cut this off a little bit. The MDF cuts off pretty easily. Just take it down And the reason we're doing this is that it won't hold on to the cutoff. So now we have some relief. So in order to keep the cutoffs from piling up in the back of the blade, we're going to add a hose from the vacuum on the exhaust side. Again, this hose is hooked up to the exhaust side of the vacuum, so it's going to blow air down this way, and it's going to push those cutoffs this way out. Now, it won't be like a kickback and slam into you. It's just the power of the air pushing them back, and they don't hurt if they hit you. I use a putty knife to pop the segment off. Take the next one. Now it's easier to line up the next one because you have the hexagon, the outer part of the hexagon, to know where to place the piece. So we're covering that hexagon with the segment. You'll notice that I usually cut more than 6 times. I just keep going until I don't feel any resistance anymore. And there we have another segment. Okay, we're going to continue until we have 5 segments in the scrap wood. And then we're going to go over and tape them together and check the gap. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is you should check your patterns before you use them. Set a bevel gauge on one corner. Take a little piece of blue tape and put it on the other corner. And then check and go around the pattern and make sure that there's no light gap, that they're all the same, that they're all the same length, they're all the same angle. The angle and the length are the same all the way around the pattern. Okay, so we're going to tape these 5 pieces together. I don't really pay too much attention to the grain. If you want to line it up, be my guest. Doesn't matter to me. I don't think it matters to the integrity of the ball or how you turn it. But the more important thing is to get those corners aligned. Okay, flip it over, and we're going to check for gaps. Now, in a perfect world, there would be no gaps. But the world isn't perfect. And I found that if you have a very slight gap, it aids in lining everything up, getting it all glued together. So I'm looking at maybe 1/64 to a 32nd of an inch gap between each of the, maybe not even that much, but just a little tiny gap so that when you're working the piece, you have a little bit of wiggle room. And we're going to get ready to glue. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is you want to take a little piece of sandpaper and go around and take any fuzzies off the edges of your pieces after they come off the saw. We're going to make 2 of these 5-piece rings, and we're going to make 1 long chain of 10. This is all taped together, ready to go. So 1 is going to be the top, 1 is going to be the bottom, and this is going to be the middle of the ball. I'm going to get set up to glue these all together. The glue I'm using is Tight Bond, no run, no drip wood glue. It's a little thicker than the normal glue. It also dries clear. It's not a yellow glue. Okay, so we're going to glue up the 5 rings first. I tend to stay away just a hair from the edges to minimize the squeeze out. We're going to have to clean that up once we get these all glued up before we can put the pentagons in. Make sure you line up your corners. Then tape it. We're going to do this to the rest of the pieces. Okay, so we're going to designate one of these as top and one of these as bottom. You may be wondering why I'm writing it 5 times, because this is going to end up one big blue ball of tape. So I want to make sure I know where the top is. I'm going to put the top on with no glue. I repeat, no glue, because we want the top to come off. Again, we're going to line up the corners, and this is where that little bit of a gap helps, so that you can line everything up. Let me do that so you can see. Line up the corners. Okay. We put our top on with no glue. Now we're going to glue the bottom on. Same as before, we're going to line up the corners.
So do you wait for each batch of segments to dry before you do all this, or?
No, you want to do it all in one so that you can adjust as you go. If you have to tweak it a little bit, there's still enough resiliency in the glue that it'll shift a little bit. Normally, if I'm doing a segmented vessel, I only put glue on one side. But because I have these little gaps, I went ahead and glued both sides. I'm going to reiterate, as afterward, that you want to make sure that the corners line up. Squeeze them together as much as you can. Use the tape to pull them tight. Next step is to clean out any squeeze out. We have these little bits of glue in the corners. We need to get that out of there so that when we go to glue in our pentagons, it doesn't interfere. So just about as exciting as watching paint dry, scraping glue out of corners. But you need to get it all out so that the pentagons will fit nicely into their spaces. Pentagons. We'll take the pattern that we made, start with some scrap, set the saw to 17 degrees. You may have to adjust for your fit. The fit on the pentagons, we want to be right on. You don't need to leave a gap. If you've got a very, very small gap, that's fine. But if you can get them to where they fit in there solid all the way through, that would be ideal.
And how did you make the scraper?
The blade is just a commercial little scraper blade from another, from Home Depot, but I just cut it down and made a handle to get into tight spaces.
And you don't have to do anything with the glue squeeze out that's on the inside, correct?
Right. That'll get turned away.
And you make the hexagons first and then tailor your pentagons to your hexagons?
Yes. We're going to make the hexagons so that ideally they sit just proud of the edges or flush, so that when you tape them in, you've got a little bit of pressure to hold them in. Not necessary. The glue's pretty good. Once you press them in, they're there to stay. So we've scraped out all the glue out of our pentagon holes. We're going to take the pentagon template pattern for the pieces. They can be a little bit smaller, 3 1/4 by 2 3/4. Line your piece up on the pattern and cut your pentagon. This again is in scrap wood, so you can test the fit. Once you have them and you're happy with the fit, go ahead and make your 12 pentagons. When you go to put them in, we're going to take and see now. Oh boy, that's really shallow. These should have been a little bit bigger, but they'll still work. When you put your pentagon in, take a look at the edges and see if there's a gap. If you have one that has a gap, rotate the pentagon and see which position gives you the best fit. Until you're happy with that, if you have to, you can go back and trim a little bit off of 2 sides and shorten up so that you can maybe fill in that gap. If you've got a very small gap, the glue will take care of it. Once you're happy with the position, just take a little pencil and mark the position on the ball and on the piece. And then you're ready to glue these in. For the very top, we're going to start with one that has a 1/4 inch hole in the center. If you take a square and put it on the end and then line the point up with the blade and draw a line and go through all of those, it'll give you a center mark. Go ahead. I put a 1/4 inch hole. You're going to find the location that best fits and glue this one in the top. So now you're going to glue in the top, then the bottom. But remember, you don't want to glue this portion to the lower portion. So you're only going to put glue here, here, and here. Put your piece in, no glue on the top two points, so that when you go to undo the taping, the top will come off. Once you have it all taped up, you're going to add a waste block to the bottom. I just used one of the scrap test pieces and turned it over and glued it on the bottom. That'll give me a point to put my drive center. So we have our ball, and it's all glued up, and the top comes away from the bottom. When you go to untape it, make sure you mark the orientation of the top to the bottom. I put a little pencil mark in the 2 spots so that I can tell how it lines up. Because if you try to rotate it, it may not fit. This is the best position for it. We're going to go to the lathe and we're going to start turning this. I've got a block of wood here that I've turned around, and I put a depression in. We're going to use this when we go to turn the inside of the bowl. I'm just going to clean up the outside and clean up the inside, and then I'll explain what's going to happen. So the curvature in here is greater than the outside diameter of the bowl. When I go to turn the inside, I'm going to put tape on the outside of the bowl, blue tape, and then I'm going to hot melt glue the piece into this block. And I'll show you that at the demonstration.